Premier Scott Moe says he is considering extending the life of the province's coal-fired plants. He says he wants baseload power that's affordable. So, is this good news for communities who employ a lot of people at a plant? We'll find out when we talk to the Mayor of Estevan. We also want to know, what does this mean for our goal to reach net zero? Is that out the window? Why are we so focused on coal right now when, for example, Alberta phased it out last year? So to help us make sense of where things are at, we have two environmental policy experts who will be joining us, and we bet you have some questions too. Give us a call, 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. People in Estevan have spent years preparing themselves for the closure of the SaskPower Boundary Dam coal-fired power plant. Federal regulation required coal-fired generation to be shut down by 2030 as part of Canada's goal of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. Last week, the Minister of Crown Corporations, Jeremy Harrison, directed SaskPower to look at ways to run its coal fleet past 2030. And he was in Estevan to deliver the news in person. Tony Cernick is the Mayor of Estevan, and he joins us right now. Welcome back to Blue Sky, Mayor.
Thanks for having me.
What is your reaction to this news that SaskPower is looking at ways to run the province's coal fleet past 2030?
Surprising and refreshing at the same time. And it's really fantastic news for Estevan, the area, and Saskatchewan itself.
Why is it surprising? I think I know why, but just elaborate on why this took you by surprise.
Just because it's, as you stated in your opening there, you know, the date of 2030 shut coal off and everything like that. And why it was surprising is just in the world of politics, you don't see too many decisions that go beyond a 4-year cycle. So, and this is like a major decision, very important for, like I said, our province. So that was the surprising part. And the refreshing part was obviously it saves jobs in our community. It gives us affordable, reliable power. And it just gives us, we were shutting things off in 2030, but we didn't have anything to transition to. So that was kind of always my problem, and lots of people within our city and our community, that was the problem with obviously shutting off our coal by 2030.
We'll get to that transition in just a moment, because I do know that there was some work taking place to help people transition to new jobs. But just first, how many jobs in your community are tied to the Boundary plant?
You're looking at probably 1,000 direct. They say 800 to 1,000 direct jobs, but again, that's, you know, in a community of 11,000, there's roughly over 10% of your people are in one workforce. So yeah, it's very important.
I can understand how important it is for those folks to keep their jobs. Do you worry at all about the environmental impact of a coal-fired plant?
I worry more about freezing in the wintertime then. So again, this is the true transition. This is what people couldn't see is, obviously we know nuclear is the future to getting us to our climate goals. But there was just nothing in place. Obviously, nuclear is being talked about. Estevan was chosen as the first site for SMRs, but the SMR technology is still new. As an example, that don't hold me to where it is, but I know it's in Ontario where the first SMR is supposed to be getting built right now. Its timeline it's supposed to be half done right now, and the reality of it hasn't even started yet. And then obviously you're hearing the cost of everything's going up. So from what we think, what we have a quote now for, you know, when it comes time 2030 rolls around, the cost of everything is going to double, triple, or quadruple. Who knows, right? So we'll wait and see where that goes. But that's where we're at.
So what I'm hearing is that you're really worried about that gap, that time period from when coal-fired plants were supposed to be shut down and when nuclear was up and running. Why do you feel so certain that nuclear is a guarantee that is the future of clean energy? Why do you feel that way?
Just again, for the base load power, right? Like we know renewables can do so much, but again, that it's just we're coming into the month of February, and we usually get 2 or 3 weeks of -40 where our furnaces don't shut off. And again, so if the power shuts off during these times, it's dangerous stuff, right? So, and nuclear, again, it's just that base load power. kind of get sick of hearing that word, but it's the reality, and that's what we need.
So who do you hold responsible for not having a transition? And we'll get back to the good news that you feel this is for community members, but you were worried that there's no transition. So who is responsible for that? Do you feel like your community could have been better placed to actually meet those goals? What are your thoughts on that?
It's not really the community. I just think it's everybody. Obviously, there were goals set that were unachievable, in the first place. So that's where rebuilding our coal fleet one more time will give us 20 years for a true transition into the next thing. As far as we know right now, to this day, nuclear is the future. May something come up in the next 5-10 years? Who knows, right? That's where we don't know. But again, that's where always had a problem with shutting off our reliable power for no replacement. That kept me up at night more than climate change.
All those plans that were happening to help people with the transition, looking at ways to transition the economy away from fossil fuels. What happens to those projects now? Absolutely nothing. We continue on as we were. So that's one thing. It changes nothing on the ECDEV side of it. One thing out of all this that came is people do realize the winds of change are blowing, if you will. So, looking for an alternative future is where even 5 years ago, we weren't looking for it at all. Where now it's just transitioned our thought process. And again, we do have, we have a Southeast Tech Hub we started here. It brings different eyes to our city. It's looking at different technologies, nuclear supply chains, seminars, 3D printing on the small side. They're building a robot. So it's just bringing. So there's a coal to graphite and coal to hydrogen. So to continue to use our coal asset was something we were looking at as well, and not having the emissions. So that's where we're going. So what does this potential new change in direction mean for your city and thinking about things like urban planning? What does this mean for city plans?
It instantly changed our thought process. Obviously, you're kind of, as a city, you should be thinking about growing. We didn't know what our future was. So we had residential areas that were kind of ready to go, but they need sewer and water infrastructure ran to them. So, everything is a $10 million project, seems like these days. So, but we had it in the background, that we may need this in the future, but it wasn't really a priority. We're now, the next day it went to, we have to figure out how to get infrastructure to these newer areas to accommodate for the next boom. So if we rebuild our coal fleet, there's going to be a boom right there. And then as the coal fleet's rebuilt, then the nukes start. So honestly, the next 30 year process, and just as a city, went straight to infrastructure, and we need to prepare for the next boom.
Did I hear you correctly that the next day you started looking at greenlighting some of those projects, like the day after Scott Moe put that status on X?
The exact day after, yeah. It changed the conversation that much. So obviously we knew that we were the first place for the nukes. But again, even the timeline for the nukes is 2029. Get going 2035, but nothing was in stone there, right? So like I said, we know we have the coal fleet going, and we know we have to use what we have today to get to where we want to be on climate initiatives. So again, but yes, the very next day, the conversation went towards improving infrastructure for sure.
What makes you feel so certain? Because obviously the provincial plan is different than what the federal government has in mind.
It will change a lot of things. There's no doubt about it once things start actually happening. So right now, as you say, it's an announcement. There's nothing written in stone. But again, just our thought process changed that much, 180.
How long do you think these coal-fired plants could run?
Well, right now we have BD3, which has the carbon capture on it. I think, don't hold me, but I think it's like 2036. It can run till we have the Shan power station that currently right now can run till 2042. So it's really our boundary. We have 3 units, 4, 5, and 6 out at boundary that will take us into the next transition for sure.
What role do you think Saskatchewan should be playing in reducing our greenhouse gas emissions?
And again, that's where nuclear is the future. Will carbon capture come into it? Carbon capture is not too popular, but technically right now it is the only technology that has actually brought emissions down. So I know it's expensive. You hear all that, which I won't deny, but at the same time, it is a technology that has brought emissions down. It's captured over 6 million tons or something like that. And then again, that CO2 goes into the Weyburn unit, into the oil field, which is another dirty word. But so you have basically that old oil field is producing 20,000 more barrels than it would have without the CO2. And of course, it's not free, but it's kind of emissions free, if you will. The amount of drilling and emissions it would take for an oil company to get from 0 to 20,000 barrels is enormous. And this is kind of eliminating all that, right? So that's just the way we see it.
I just want to point out that you've got this black shirt on that has a yellow heart with the words Estevan Energy. Do you want to just talk to me about that shirt that you're wearing?
It's just something that came up from a first-term mayor, but I was a councillor for 4 years. So it's just something that I came up with on my own marketing sense. And the reason why I got into this was, people were down and out. The town thought it was dying and just needed a boost. Obviously the city, the coal industry goes away. There's no doubt it'll hurt, but just to bring a different attitude, like you wear it on your heart. So, and that's what it is. And we'll find energy. When you hear energy, you think oil and gas and coal, but it is so much more. And that's just where we want to go, even with our economic initiatives and stuff like that, is again, it changed our attitude where we leave no stone unturned. We will look at any technology. And because we do have what the world wants here in Estevan is land and water, and we have plenty of it. So again, whatever the province, the country wants to build, we can accommodate it. So that's where Estevan Energy comes in. And again, you just wear it on your heart.
Mayor, so good to talk to you today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tony Cernick is the mayor of Estevan. We are hoping to hear from you today, your thoughts, 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. With us in our Regina studio today, Brett Dolter is an associate professor in the Department of Economics at the University of Regina. He does focus on climate change policy and environmental economics. And joining him, next to him, is Margot Hurlbert. She is Canada Research Chair in Climate Change, Energy, and Sustainability Policy at the University of Regina. So Margot, hello.
Hello.
And Brett, welcome.
Hello.
So Brett, I know you've been listening. You've got a bit of a different take on this decision by the provincial government. What was your reaction when you learned that SaskPower had been directed to look at how to keep those coal-fired plants running past 2030?
Well, I guess I shared the surprise that the mayor has noted. The surprise was there because SaskPower has been engaging with the public, talking about supply planning for years, and coal hasn't been a part of that conversation in terms of keeping conventional coal without any abatement, without any carbon capture and storage. It hasn't been part of the conversation because looking at the federal regulation, it hasn't been legal, and it actually still isn't legal. So, to me, it raises a lot of questions about the risks of announcing a strategy before it looks like before they've studied it, and there's a number of risks you could think about. You think about is this actually going to be affordable? Is this the cheapest path forward? We refurbished Boundary Dam 3. That was a $600 million project to get in the end 120 megawatts of capacity. The Moose Jaw gas plant cost about twice as much for 3 times that capacity. So it's not cheap to refurbish a coal plant to keep it running. And is that really going to be the best use of our dollars? We know the lowest cost way to get electrons on our system right now is to build new wind. Coal plants don't work that well with wind because they can't follow the ups and downs of wind. Gas plants do. So that's why SaskPower's plan had been gas plants and wind, and looking at other technologies like gas with carbon capture and storage. You can even look at the reliability aspect. So my look at this is where are we in this world where we're trying to get to net zero? As a world community, we have to do that together to stop temperatures from rising. If we don't, then we live in a world where electricity is not reliable, where we have increased droughts, which put our hydro assets at risk. We have a lot of hydro in the province, over 1,100 megawatts, almost as much hydro as we have coal. And if we don't have the water, then those assets are not going to provide the affordable, reliable power. We know we get more storms, more floods. Estevan had a big storm 2011 that affected the coal supply. Poplar River got taken out of commission 2023 by a big storm. So, yes, things, you hope they'll be reliable, but as climate change intensifies, these things actually are more vulnerable as well. So we've got to, as a world community, get the emissions down. This retiring coal in 2030 would have dropped SaskPower's emissions significantly. As it stands, SaskPower's emissions have been pretty steady for 25 years. We haven't really done a lot to get them down. Coal retirements would have taken them and reduced them to about half or better from where they're at. So now we are becoming this outlier, this pollution pariah, where we now are responsible for almost 30% of Canada's electricity sector pollution because we're one of the last places with coal power.
I want to hear Margot's reaction, but I just want you to elaborate a bit, Brett, and kind of just really break it down to back to basics for us in some ways. Why is there such a concern, environmental concern with coal-fired plants? What are the emissions from a coal-fired plant? Why is it such a concern?
So when you burn straight coal or lignite coal like we have in Saskatchewan, you're talking about close to a ton of carbon dioxide for every ton per megawatt hour of electricity provided. A gas plant can come in about a third of that if it's operating efficiently. If you put carbon capture and storage on these plants, it can come in at maybe a tenth of that. So it's just a much more emissions intensive, much more polluting source of electricity, and we see that's why the world's getting out of it.
Margot, what was your reaction when you saw this statement from Premier Scott Moe on X?
Like Brett, I was a little surprised, but thinking about the messaging around cost and what's happening in the United States with the statements of Trump and his tweets about clean coal, I guess I'm not as surprised, and I agree with everything Brett has said, but to add a different light to the conversation, it's really kicking the can down the road. And really, Trump will be in for 4 years. We'll have another election. Whichever government forms that in Canada will have a similar time frame. It's inevitable that coal will be closed down. So what are the benefits for doing this? 5 years to transition away from all coal by 2030 was ambitious. Don't get me wrong. For climate change and mitigation, it's absolutely necessary to shut the coal plants down like every other province has done. But in thinking about it in relation to cost, it allows some bargaining power. So our hydro, because of our drought since 2001, has been reduced substantially. And if we're adapting to climate change and increasing our irrigation, we may have even less hydro going forward. We're hoping this drought is over. It's cost the government of Saskatchewan quite a bit with our agricultural drought and our hydrological drought that has happened. So when we look at that, having to commit to take the 5th SMR from Hitachi, so Darlington and OPG have 4 that they're working on in Ontario, and we would have been taking the 5th. By those delays and kicking it down the road, I think it gives us a better negotiation on price because we don't know the price of those SMRs. So if we're not obligated to be the 5th SMR purchaser, but perhaps be a later purchaser, we have an ability to put off that decision. And also thinking of the opportunity, look into battery storage. Look into big solar sites in Estevan where those lignite coal fields are reclaimed and restored to have cooperatives build more wind power. Like we have the ability to expand wind and solar like no tomorrow if we so desire, because the costs of those have come way down. So I like to see some silver linings with this.
Okay. I want to pick up on a number of points that each of you have made, but I want to take a second to check in with the CBC's David Shield, who joins us right now. David, what's making news?
Well, police are investigating 2 fatal highway crashes. 3 people died in the Melfort area on Friday. Then Saturday evening, a man died in a single vehicle rollover on Highway 1 near Parkbeg. Public schools in Regina have no plans to alter their change room policy. Their plan lets students choose which bathroom and change room to use based on their gender identity. The provincial government is letting school divisions develop their own policies around school change rooms. And software developed in Saskatoon is becoming a big hit with food banks across the country. Foodcopia makes it easy for food banks to store, sort, and distribute food to families. The Fort McMurray Food Bank says its old system often resulted in wrong numbers and was difficult to use. And I'll have a full newscast for it coming up at 1 o'clock.
David, thank you.
You're welcome.
That is the CBC's David Shield. We've got a few people emailing us to comment on the statement made by Premier Scott Moe that they're going to look at how to potentially extend the life of our coal-powered plants. So you can join the conversation too, 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. Margot and Brett, I think the big question that I think a lot of people have is can we even do this? Like, legally, can we do this? And before I get your response to that, I do want to share with folks a bit of a conversation that I had with Martin Olshinsky. So he's from Saskatoon, now teaches law at the University of Calgary. And I just want to hone in on that last part of Scott Moe's tweet before we play this tape, because Moe said, our decisions on the future of power generation will be based solely on what is best for Saskatchewan families and our economy, not unconstitutional federal regulations. So let's listen to what Martin had to say about that.
So at the end of the day, of course, it'll be up to the courts to decide whether they are or aren't. I do think it's worth pointing out that those regulations on what are called the clean electricity regulations are now live. They were passed in December of last year. They don't really bite until 2035, so that's part of the interesting thing about them. But there's certainly there are laws on the books now. My own view, is that, and I've spent some time analyzing those regulations and thinking about the jurisdiction that the federal government is claiming to use here. So the federal government has this broad power, we call it the federal criminal law power, but it's not just restricted to the criminal code and just matters of criminal law the way that some politicians suggest. We use it to regulate tobacco advertising, we've used it to regulate the sharing of genetic information, we use it for food and drug safety. And so under that power, the courts have been pretty consistent that it can be used for environmental protection. It is the main anchor for the federal prohibition against toxic substances. And so, my view, my read of that law, those cases and the rules around them is that the federal government, while definitely, skating close to that line, I think has stuck to and respected the rules around the exercise of that power with these regulations. So my read is that they are probably constitutional, but of course that will be up to a judge to decide at some point.
It does make me think that we could be headed for another legal fight. But Brett, what's your take on this?
Yeah, well, I think about this, and I think about how any other company operating in Saskatchewan, if there's a law or regulation passed, they're going to abide by it. I think it's only because we have these crown corporations that we've now had it so that the responsibility of operating the crown is transferred to the minister, that there's sort of a game of political brinksmanship happening where the provincial government is saying, well, we're going to break the law and, maybe we'll challenge it in the courts. But if the courts rule for the federal government, then you'll have to come and lock up our minister. And so I think it's this political game being played with the law. I don't see, a mining company in Saskatchewan would never say the same thing. So I think it's a bit of a weaponization of the crowns to use them in that way. And I don't think that's ever, what the public of Saskatchewan would have imagined the crowns were for.
Margot, what do you think?
Yeah, it's consistent with the Saskatchewan and Alberta political position of the unconstitutionality of the federal government's actions, right? So they're playing close to that songbook. You heard the lawyer's opinion. He stated it was probably constitutional. So I worry as a non-practicing lawyer about the rule of law, with Trump pardoning so many people that have been convicted. And I do see a drastic change that's happened over the 40 years that I've practiced. That's very concerning, for sure. And I our crowns for sure do report into the minister, but technically they have a board of directors, and those directors would have some liability on having made decisions that were contrary to the law. So if I were advising the Crown corporations and the boards of directors, that would be an interesting conversation. It will also be very interesting to see the provincial auditor, if the provincial auditor steps in and audits the Crown corporations. So right now it's Sask Energy that's not charging the carbon tax, right?
Right.
But on the political sense, we have a member of the opposition, Polyev, who's stating axe the tax. So I do think politics is becoming more and more in the foreground.
I want to share just one more bit from my conversation with Martin Olshinsky about this. Let's listen.
I mean, we used to mine asbestos in Canada, in Quebec in particular. But we don't do that anymore because we recognize that asbestos kills people. We, when we realized that tobacco and that cigarettes were killing people, we took broad steps to restrict tobacco usage, and that had a negative impact on tobacco farmers, for instance. So, and I get and I understand, for instance, and empathize with the folks down in Estevan. They have jobs and they want to be able to keep those jobs. But this is not a new reality that we're in. We've been through these kind of situations before. There are ways to do this. It's not an all or nothing sort of proposition. There are ways to help soften the blows. There are programs that can be done. And again, it doesn't have to be, perfection is the enemy of the good. And I totally subscribe to that. I tell myself that every day. But so then when you have a complete rejection, which is what I think we do with this slogan of affordability and reliability, just a total rejection of any consideration of something that's clearly affected. And again, not just like the wildfires right now in Los Angeles, but our own fire seasons, flooding in British Columbia, all of these things that are happening. To reject it in that kind of way, again, is this kind of like, America first, me first, Saskatchewan first, and frankly, and pardon my language, but screw the rest. And that's not really the Saskatchewan that I'm used to, but that seems to be the vibe right now for a big chunk of it.
Okay, so that's Martin Olshinsky. He is from Saskatoon, now teaches law at the University of Calgary. We've got several people eager to get in on the conversation, so let's do that next. Let's say hello to Judy, who is in Estevan. Judy, welcome to Blue Sky.
Thank you. I'm enjoying this show very much because it's very hard to talk about renewables in Estevan. I know it's many people's jobs, but I think there also are jobs in renewables. Just a few points here. Carbon capture, SaskPower has to pay a fine for every day that the carbon capture doesn't work. And I was talking to a fellow who works at the plant and has told me that it's a large amount of money that they pay, and he said that it's not something that they like to talk about, but he said it does cost a lot.
You know what, Judy, I'll stop you there because I want Brett to just pick up there, because that's not something I know a lot about. But Brett, is that the case?
I don't know recently if they're able to make their contractual obligations, but there was an obligation to supply the CO2 to Whitecap, and if they couldn't meet that obligation, there was a penalty. So I'm not sure where that is at now. If the capture plants, I think, have been working better, but that is a risk that if you can't supply, then you've got someone who's going to buy that CO2, and they're going to penalize you if you don't supply.
Judy, thanks for bringing that up. I'll let you continue now.
Okay. Another thing is a private farmer living close to the power plant was approached by a private company from Ontario, and they were interested in putting up a solar unit and hooking up to the power plant. And he was quite excited because he's for renewables, and also it would be a chance for him to make some money. But the company came back and they said provincial government would not negotiate at all. And this is, I bet you maybe about 10 years ago. And our government is just saying no, no, no. And I just feel really bad because I believe in climate change. Another point, my daughter lives in Minnesota. They have turbines and solar. They've been doing this for about 25 years. And she phoned me a while ago and said her electricity bill for the month of December was nil, no charge. And she said it's just been going down, down, down. And now she had nothing to pay in December. And I'd just like to say this because it seems in Saskatchewan we're all kind of dumb. We don't know what's going on. And I know that there is climate change, and I really believe in it. And it's ironic. Estevan is the sunshine capital of Saskatchewan. So there, we could use lots of solar panels around here. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks for calling, Judy. That was Judy in Estevan. Margot, is there anything in particular there that you want to pick up on? I do want to hone in. If that's indeed true, that Judy's daughter had no charge, it does make me think about the language that's being used around this, the emphasis on affordability. That's what matters right now. We need to get prices down for people. Margot, what's top of mind for you?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I don't know Judy or her daughter in Minnesota, what exactly the agreement is there. But I do know that for people that got in early on solar, they were able to negotiate pay in. They negotiated that they could supply into the grid power and receive compensation for that, right? Mm-hmm. So they effectively paid zero for their energy. And I assume that's what Judy's daughter is talking about, because even with solar or wind, there's still going to be costs to running the grid. Like, it won't reduce our, as Saskatchewan customers, it won't reduce our costs to zero by building a lot of wind and solar, although the price is coming down. So for people that got in early, they negotiated these contracts, but the latent impact of those contracts then is that the customers that didn't get those contracts and couldn't afford to put in a solar plant or leverage a solar plant weren't able to get that benefit. So it falls to the less well-off customers that can't afford to put solar on their house to pay the ongoing costs for base load power. So it had a very inequitable result in many jurisdictions where solar contracts like that exist.
That's interesting. Brett, what are your thoughts on the message from Scott Moe that continuing to operate our coal-powered plants allows for reliable power and affordable power?
Well, I guess I just think SaskPower has been running processes, public processes, internal processes to come up with the best supply plan for the province. And, I trust their expertise to do that. So I don't think it's a good approach to decision-making for a minister or a government to come in and say, actually, we want you to do this. At this point, it sounds like that's what they've done, is they've directed SaskPower to look at this and potentially to break the federal law. I think we'd have a reputational risk if companies come in here and see that government is going to be able to direct crowns to do their bidding. I think that's a risk. Companies wanting to come and invest here. I think there's also a risk that the economic development side of this. Who is going to want to come to Saskatchewan and build a new project if we have the dirtiest electricity in the country? The mining companies are not looking for that. They're trying to clean up their own operations. So, that could be a disadvantage. We're going to possibly lose investment because we're the holdovers with coal.
Yeah, and I just want to remind people, like, Alberta did phase out coal last year, right? So they successfully did that. Are we really the only province that still has coal-fired plants?
Nova Scotia and New Brunswick also have them, and they're looking to phase them out by 2030. So, it sounds like they've been working more collaboratively with the federal government to meet the clean electricity regulations and the coal-fired regulations. And so the clean electricity regulations are the new one. The coal-fired regulations were actually passed in 2012 under Stephen Harper's government. The Minister Harrison was at one time an MP under Stephen Harper. And so it's a bit surprising that old regulation is now the thing that we're saying we're not going to follow.
We'll pause there for a second because I want to welcome another caller to the show. Don is on the line in Saskatoon. Hello, Don.
Hello from Saskatoon, where it's a little bit warmer right now.
Nice. What are your thoughts on all of this, Don?
Well, a couple of things. One is that, Moe, what's going on right now is that the population of Saskatchewan is being endangered by moving ahead and where Moe and his buddies are going. And we definitely need alternative energy. And I think we really have to look at how we can challenge him. And, he has no right to take over the public corporations. He has no right with his sidekicks, the people who work beside him, to go ahead and do what he's doing now with coal. So I really think that citizens of Saskatoon and across Saskatchewan have to think about a way of really going after Mr. Moe and his buddies and saying, no, we don't want this at all. And we have to figure out, maybe there was a lawyer on it earlier, there's other people, but we need to build a citizens coalition that says to Moe, stop it. Because we're seeing this in agriculture as well, with a lot of land being corporatized. So we're at a point in Saskatchewan where we should say it's not for sale. We want it to serve the public.
Don, thanks for calling. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
That was Don joining us in Saskatoon. Let's get through some emails here. So Mike writes, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a trend of leaders walking back or simply abandoning prior commitments to the electorate. Politicians are perhaps learning that the fallout for doing a 180 is not as drastic as they once thought, as they watch and are emboldened by Donald Trump's style. In any case, our province is far too dependent on coal to make a transition in 2030 even remotely realistic. And a couple more here. So Judy writes, train and put them to work in a solar panel factory. All such factories do not have to be in Eastern Canada. Look at the solar panel farms and other users in Alberta. Let's get on it, eh? It's from Judy. And Kevin writes, carbon capture isn't scalable and won't fix our emission problems. It's just a fantasy that is sold by the oil and gas industry to greenwash their operations. The idea of capturing carbon so it can be used to get more oil out of the ground in order to burn it is laughable. Nuclear power isn't perfect, but it's a better option than anything else on the table. And we did have someone else call saying from someone wondering how efficient the carbon capture operation at SaskPower is in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. You talked a bit about carbon capture, Brett. Margot, I don't know if you want to start or if Brett, I'll let you two decide, but just to pick up on some of the concerns there with carbon capture. I'll just speak very high level on the carbon capture. I was actually really proud of Saskatchewan when Brad Wall's government did the Clean Green CCS project, the first post-combustion CCS project in the world, actually. But it was a first, so it has hiccups and still issues to this day, which I think the callers in and Brett have spoken to quite eloquently. CCS, we have a knowledge center at the University of Regina on CCS that has an incredible amount of knowledge from SaskPower and elsewhere on CCS. Alberta has gone into CCS and a pipeline of carbon CO2 that's quite impressive. So in relation to industry and hydrogen production and oil and gas and solvent manufacturing and industry, it really is something that Saskatchewan has dropped for many reasons. Maybe it's not our skill set. It's got parasitic power, so it takes a lot of energy to run a CCS plant. You need to burn a whole bunch more coal to get less power out, and it is not clean. So it's still got about 10% of the emissions coming out of it. And there are actually some pollutants that come out with CO2 like amine, aldehydes, ammonia, nitrosamines. So there are still some issues around CCS and pollution to think about. And I don't mean to dish CCS because I do think if we think of problems more holistically, we can come up with better solutions. And I just think it's really important to think like that. So I actually am not sure we have any solar panels built in Ontario. Maybe Brett knows of this. To my understanding, they're all built in China, and China has the sand that's necessary. And our supply chains are becoming more and more important when we consider these decisions about what we want to have and what do we do with solar panels when we're done with them, and wind turbines as well. So I think this is an opportunity to have more public dialogue about what our power production, thinking holistically and melding it with our oil and gas industry and our hydrogen and our manufacturing and our heat.
our heat system, which is natural gas and eventually has to go away, and the rise of electric vehicles, which means our power needs are going to double, maybe triple. So if we think holistically now and have public engagement, I think it's a window of opportunity.
Brett, anything you want to add before we go to another caller?
Yeah, I guess just in terms of that technical question on the Boundary Dam 3, so the most recent report is it's at about 364 tons of CO2 per gigawatt hour, which is about the same as a natural gas plant. So they're not running it to the 90% capture. They can run it to the 364. Now, you can put carbon capture and storage on a gas plant. That's what the new federal regulations allow and would encourage. We haven't seen any of those projects built, but I think that's an area where there could be some expertise where we leverage the CCS Knowledge Center, what we learned at Boundary Dam 3, but we also use natural gas because we can build those turbines cheaper. There's companies that would allow us to, we could use their expertise. GE doesn't have a coal-fired power branch division anymore because no one's building coal plants. So I'm not sure how much expertise there is to refurbish a bunch of coal plants instead of building gas and then looking at CCS on those.
Although it does, I just want to share an email and a note on that. So Jan writes, I think Daniel Smith in Alberta just rescinded the ban on coal exploration in the Rockies. There were demonstrations on the weekend, if I'm correct. Sad that two of our right-wing premiers can't think for themselves. King Trump likes coal, so we should too. And then we were just quickly looking up what's happening in Alberta. And so this is from a CBC News story that says the Alberta government did recently lift a ban on coal mining in the Eastern Slope, something the Alberta energy regulator said will allow suspended projects to resume. And an energy law expert said will open up large tracts of land to coal exploration. Brett, what's your reaction to that?
Well, I think some of that is metallurgical coal, where they'll take it and export it to, I guess, Asia for use in steel making. So it won't necessarily. I don't think they're talking about thermal coal that they're going to burn in power plants. They're talking about metallurgical coal that gets used in steel production and gets exported.
Okay. I appreciate that. Let's go to another caller. So Ingrid joins us on the line in Regina. Hello, Ingrid.
Hi. Yes, I wanted to make the point that I think that this is also a political game. It's obviously a political game by Conservatives and the Sask party to provoke the Liberal government, to cause a fight about the carbon tax and all of that. And it's just another, and they also want to make a fuss around the Constitution because in reality, Moe is breaking the law by expanding coal. The federal government has jurisdiction over anything that goes between provinces. Pollution goes across provincial borders, and it is the federal government's jurisdiction. It is not provincial jurisdiction. Moe keeps saying this is a constitutional right of Saskatchewan. It is not. It's totally the opposite. So that's one point. The other point is that coal, apart from the fact that it is highly inefficient in terms of a way to produce energy, and pouring like billions of tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The coal in Saskatchewan is filthy coal. It's really dirty. So we could have all kinds of other horrendous chemicals, toxic chemicals being emitted and being put into soils. Arsenic is one of them. There are lots of other really highly toxic chemicals that are being emitted as well. Jobs. You can't compare. I mean, it's all fully automated. So the number of jobs you get in solar are massively more than you get with a stupid coal idea. It's just ridiculous. And it's only a political game.
Ingrid,
that's what Sask Moe is doing.
Yeah, I appreciate you calling and sharing that. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. That was Ingrid in Regina. I want to get to another email here because it does kind of circle back to the start of the show when we talked to the mayor of Estevan. So Michael writes, again and again, it is hard to believe Premier Moe spent time as our environment minister, as he clearly does not believe in climate change. A move to extend the life of this dirty coal is highly irresponsible, and the rest of Canada, and indeed most of the world, is quickly moving away from it, since it not only produces CO2, but the pollution kills people. Not embracing renewables in the heart of some of the best solar and wind in the country, we will also harm our ability to implement reliable power from non-fossil fuel sources. Also, mining and potash companies are seeking to reduce their footprints, and why would they invest in a province with dirty coal? The fact is, SMRs are many years away and will be unaffordable for our sparse population anyway. Today's resources should be going into renewables and battery storage, as Australia has done very successfully to date. Lastly, the mayor talked about baseload and greatly exaggerated that February is around the corner and we usually get minus 40 for 2 or 3 weeks. This hasn't happened for many decades, and he needs to start understanding why. We don't have a ton of time left, but Margot or Brett, anything from that email that you want to touch on?
Yeah, I think it's really important to note the urgency of dealing with climate change and reducing our emissions almost immediately. A lot of the world's talking about 2050, and that's just way too far away, like so far away. So we really have to come up with solutions now, and those renewable energies are affordable, the technology is there, the costs are low. So I think we need to know how much the refurbishment costs are going to be so that we can actually assess the cost of a new wind or solar installation versus this proposal.
Brett, what is the sense of urgency in your mind?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we're seeing the impacts as we've hit 1.5 degrees Celsius globally, but we've been more like 3 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial temperatures in Canada. So we're heating up faster than most of the world. We're going to see those impacts more intensely. And so it does point to our need to play a role. And sometimes you'll hear that, we can keep burning coal because, hey, China keeps burning coal. And so sort of, my mom used to ask me when I was a kid, if your friend jumped off a bridge, would you do it too? And I think about that, but I also think if you look at regions like China, they're regularly at about 30% renewable on their grid. This past May, they were at 44% wind and solar and hydro on their grid. So everywhere is trying to get cleaner, and I think we've got to be part of that. I think there's an opportunity to look at that, and I think actually SaskPower has been looking at that. So I think SaskPower, I'm sure there are people in SaskPower who are also surprised by this and saying, the minister has told us to do this. We've studied it for years. We've decided it's not a great idea, but we're going to study it again. And I hope, I think it's a bit of a cart before the horse. I hope that we haven't given false hopes to Coronach and Estevan that we're going to keep coal alive when it turns out we're not going to.
That's what I want to ask you about. I just want to take the last 15 seconds, and maybe both of you can just quickly weigh in. If you had the chance to sit down with someone in Estevan who wants to keep that job, and you heard that positivity from the mayor with this announcement, what would you say to someone who lives in one of those communities? Margot?
False hope.
Okay, that's it. Brett, what would you say?
I'd want to know what's happened so far, because I'm sure SaskPower's had those conversations, and whether it's helping people get ready with a new skill set to move into another industry or retire with a good package. I'm sure there's been efforts that have been taken, and we can take more of those efforts. I think we have to take those efforts to make sure that nobody is going to be suffering because we've moved it to act on climate change.
It's been great having both of you here. And, thanks to the Mayor of Estevan for joining us too. Margot, thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being here.
And Brett, thank you.
Thank you.
That's Brett Dolter, an associate professor in the Department of Economics at the University of Regina, and Margot Hurlbert, who's a professor in the Johnson Shoyama Graduate School of Public Policy at the University of Regina, also Canada Research Chair for Climate Change, Energy, and Sustainability. I can fit in one more email here. So James writes, the Conservative fascination with clinging to dying forms of energy production ignores entirely the fact that investing in new energy sources results in training for new careers, new training schools, manufacturing jobs, maintenance and construction jobs. People in Saskatchewan seem to ignore this too. And all of it is to our detriment. That comes to us from James. You can email us anytime, bluesky@cbc.ca. Coming up on our next show, we'll look at the number of courses offered to high school students that take them out of the classroom for work experience. This comes after the announcement that the distance learning program will be offering a new oil and gas class, and it turned a few heads. So we'll look at what else is offered in our schools across the province. That's on Blue Sky. Join us for the conversation.